Hi, thanks for tuning in and thanks for coming to my channel, Devil in the Details. My name's Alexis and I'm your host. Just wanted to give everyone a shout out for joining me on this podcast and listening to this case that I have for you guys this week. Really excited for you all to be here. Since this is a new podcast, I'm still kind of navigating my way on how to begin and end the whole podcast, so just bear with me, and I hope you guys enjoy everything. But our case this week is based on the Ken and Barbie Killers. This is a Canadian case that took place back in the 1990s, and it's honestly kind of a crazy one. I have some twists and turns in here for you guys today, so I hope you enjoy it, but let's get into it. Also, if you hear dogs barking in the background, I'm trying, but I live above my work, which is an animal hospital, and you can hear them right now. And I honestly just gonna have to re-record 100 times if I stop and start and stop and start. So I'm gonna try and get control of that a little bit more, but just bear with me. If you hear the dogs in the background, there's literally nothing I can do. So I really hope you guys just hang in there with me, and I hope the little dog down there stops barking because I don't know what else to do. So let's get into the case, and I hope you enjoy. So, kind of lied earlier, kind of starts a little bit before 1990s, but in May 1988 in Scarborough, Canada, several women had came forward about sexual assaults that were happening in the area. Most of these assaults would happen when they were getting off of the bus or train, and someone would come up behind them. So the attacks were total blitz attacks. They didn't see anything and didn't see anybody. And that was very important detail in the case going forward, because it took a long time for them to kind of figure out what was going on. And I think that was one of the main reasons, is no one had a face to go along with the attacks. And over the next year, the attacks became a lot worse. So a lot of the women were getting raped, they were getting beaten, they were having to perform oral acts, as well as they were did sodomy on them. So I don't know how to use sodomy in a sentence, as that sounds awful, but yeah, that's, I mean, very seriously though, like, that was something that happened to them that really was awful. I couldn't imagine just walking and something like that happening to me, and then also not knowing anything. So when you even try to go to the police to ask for help, they're not able to help you because you have no idea what the person looks like, just that something very violating happened to you. So that was awful. They did, the Scarborough police, were trying to look for a suspect. They had a hard time, again, because they didn't know what he looked like, so it was kind of hard for them to find who this guy was or who the suspect was. So they ended up bringing in a FBI profiler to help, and they actually ended up finding 4 more cases when they brought the FBI profiler in, and I think that was just because he had a little bit of more knowledge on what they were looking for, and then also what to report to the public, so people were able to come forward and say, hey, this happened to me, I didn't realize, it was related to this. The FBI profiler, his profile on the suspect was that they were anger-based, the attacks that he would have. They were also really sadistic, and that combo was really rare, but also super dangerous. So they were starting to become a little bit concerned. I mean, they were already very concerned, but they were becoming more concerned that this is going to be a serial killer, a serial rapist, and it was going to get a lot worse. And they also don't know who it is, who they're looking for, so now they're like, we can't even help the public and let them know, like, who to look out for, because they have no idea what this guy looks like. And they also didn't want to create mass panic, so they didn't go around on the news and tell people, hey, so-and-so, this is happening, because at the beginning it was only a few attacks, not enough for them to connect it to the same person, but also not enough for them to go on the news and create mass hysteria. and worrisome about being out in the streets. Also, the FBI profiler did note that this was an intelligent and sexually sadistic attacker, and they guessed that he or she, could be a she, you never know nowadays, but he or she was in their early 20s. So pretty young to be creating these attacks. We're not looking for an older person. I know a lot of the cases in the 2000s, I feel like, was a good amount of older people that were, older. Sorry to say it, guys, but there was a lot of older guys that were behind the attacks. More men than there are women. But in this case, there is a woman, so let's keep going. And I just want to go into these cases so we can kind of get a background. So these were classified by the Scarborough rapists, is what they started calling these cases, kind of grouped them together and what was happening at the time. So in 1987, there was 6 different victims. A lot of these victims remained unnamed. So I don't have a name, but I do have years, like how old they were. So I'll just kind of go through that really, really quick. May 4th, there was a 21-year-old victim. May 14th, just 10 days after, 19-year-old victim. September 29th, there was a 15-year-old victim. December 16th, 15-year-old victim. And December 23rd, 17-year-old victim. And it seemed like they were just getting worse and worse, because at first when I was researching these, it was just like rapes, and then it got worse. Like the last one in December 23rd, the 17-year-old victim was also sexually violated with a knife. So it seems like it was kind of upping the ante with what this suspect was doing to these poor victims. And then so that was 1987, going forward with more victims. So just want to note as well, that was 6 victims. I found in the case over the next 3 years, it was 6 victims, 6, which I thought was really weird. So altogether it was 666 over 3 years. Weird, okay? Going forward, 1988, April 18th, a 17-year-old victim. May 30th, an 18-year-old victim. October 4th, didn't say how old, but just this person was actually stabbed when she was attempting to fight back, which was really awful, but at the same time, like, go you for fighting back, because honestly, like, I know some of us, if we were in that situation, I would fight until, like, the death. I would not, like, I wouldn't give up. Like, I would just, I don't know if I could just, like, lay there and have stuff like that happen and not be fucking losing my mind, basically. So, but again, everyone's different, and I'm not saying that if you did sit there and take it, then you're any less. That's just how I would react to the situation with my personality and how I am. But I'd also probably die. Maybe you would survive to tell the story and find this bastard. So going forward, though, 1989, so next year, June 20th. So it seems like there was a bit of a 6-month gap between the previous victim. So 1989, June 20th. No age, but it was just another rape that had happened. August 15th was a 22-year-old victim. November 21st was 15-year-old victim, and December 22nd was a 19-year-old victim. So it seems like collectively throughout all the years, it's like a 3 to 6 month waiting period between each rape. Which sucks as well, because that's also hard for the police, because it's kind of, when it's happening, you don't notice that it's every 3 months until you collect the data and look at it like this. So I'm sure it was a lot harder for them to realize that every 3 months or every 6 months there was a rape happening, so it's hard to kind of warn the public as well. Also to note, in 1990 there was another 19-year-old victim. And that was right before the rapes and sexual assaults kind of stopped happening. And I think that's because they were getting closer to who this suspect was. So let's see who our suspect was, basically. Once they brought the FBI profiler in to help, he kind of helped create a sketch of what they would be assuming this person to look like. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Criminal Minds, but kind of like that. Like, hey, we're in the college town. We're going to be looking for a younger guy. We don't think this is an older guy based on the type of killings or assaults he's doing. So that kind of is the vibe I got when I was researching of what the FBI profiler did when he came in, was kind of like a Criminal Minds thing. So that was kind of what I associated with this. So they believed the Scarborough rapist looked like was blue eyes, good looking male with light hair, younger, especially since most of the victims that he was raping were a lot younger. So of course he's probably got to be younger to be luring in these victims. So on May 29th of 1990, police released a sketch of what they believe the Scarborough rapist looked like, with the help of that FBI profiler and some of the victims. And, you know, like, hey, does you think this matches him? What would you say based on, like, that little glimpse you had gotten? They released a sketch, which I will include a picture of the sketch on my Instagram. So if you want to go and see what that sketch was, go to my Instagram and take a look, and there'll be a picture there for you to reference to. But after they released that sketch, they had hundreds of people calling in connection to the case. One of these suspects was Paul Bernardo. And the reason Paul Bernardo was one of the suspects is because he actually had multiple friends. I think it was like 5 friends call different times, not all together, but over the next few weeks, call and say, hey, this looks exactly like Paul Bernardo. He lives in the area. He does this for work. He's currently in college. At the time, Paul Bernardo was in college studying accounting. So it's very, very possible that he was the suspect they were looking for. It was kind of annoying, though, because it took them like a few months before they finally went to question Paul Bernardo, even though they had like 5 people call and say, hey, this looks like him, and it took them forever just to like follow up and go talk with Paul about it. So finally they bring Paul in for a questioning. He came in willingly to do the questioning. He's kind of a fucking arrogant asshole, and I think that's why he went to do the questioning, because he just knew that if he went to do the questioning, he wouldn't be as much suspected as if he like ran away or asked for a lawyer. So he went in for the questioning. He was super cooperative with police. They also were able to get a DNA sample from him. And back in the 1990s, you know, DNA testing was just taking off and it was in its infancy. So it took them a while to get the results back. So Paul gave him the DNA DNA sample, did the questioning with them, and then left. And it would be a few years before they were able to get that tested. So if that type of I should try not to cuss so much, but if that type of shit pisses you off, just wait, because that was a few years. So after that, Paul, he kind of was shady, and he decided to leave the area and move. And that was because he was the Scarborough rapist, and he knew that police was on to him, and he had to get the fuck out of there. So he decides, I'm gonna go move 80 miles away in with my girlfriend, who's 7 years younger than me, and, you know, get the fuck out of here before anything else happens. And I think he was just hightailing it out of there to control his urges, because he knew if he kept doing any rapes in that area, the police were probably going to start watching him. So, which is also just kind of also a red flag. Like, he moves and they stop, which is what happened. So he moves in with his girlfriend. We're going to take a look now at kind of the background of Paul, and then also his girlfriend, Carla, and see kind of what they have in common. So we'll start with Paul. Paul Bernardo was born on August 27th of 1964. He is a Virgo. And that's something I want to do with some of my podcast cases, is see what zodiac sign that these people these shitheads are, because I just want to know. I'm sure, and I've listened, like I said, I've listened to tons of podcasts and YouTubes, and they're all over the place. Like, it doesn't really matter. You could probably find a serial killer, a rapist, every single bad person you could find a single zodiac for. It doesn't matter. But I think it's interesting to throw in there. So, he was a Virgo. And he was born in Scarborough, Canada. He was the youngest child out of his 3-child household. His parents were Kenneth and Marilyn Bernardo. The marriage was an unhappy one. It seems like it was kind of forced on by the grandparents, so that wasn't really a good situation. I wanted to say vibe. It wasn't really a good situation for a marriage to start on, especially down the line. Paul Bernardo's dad would face charges for peeping, being like a peeping Tom, and then pedophilia. He was also abusive to other members in the family, like his Paul's sister or his daughter. He molested his daughter, which is really fucked up. And it's interesting to see in some of these cases how a child's growing up in that childhood, how it affects these now pieces of shit that also are raping and doing shit, and wonder if it could be avoided if maybe Paul would have just grown up in a stable and loving environment that wasn't subjected to this shit early on, and maybe forming his brain to what maybe he thinks is okay. But I don't know, he could just also be a piece of shit, so I don't know. But anyway, going on, so it seems like when his dad was known for sexually abusing his sister, nothing that I read was like actually came out of it. He didn't go to jail or anything like that. But later in life, when Bernardo was like 15, he actually found out that Kenneth Bernardo wasn't actually his biological father, and that his mom had conceived him out of a sexual encounter that was just basically her cheating. So that kind of pissed Bernardo off, and that kind of started pissing Paul Bernardo off, and he started actually calling his mom a slut and a whore, which everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has those days. Everyone wants to cheat on their husband. I'm kidding. No one wants to do that. I mean, some people, but whatever, not me. But so she made a mistake, and her son started fucking giving her bad punishment for it. But she was no better because she reciprocated by calling him a bastard. Rude. And, so they just had a lot of resentment for one another when Paul was growing up, which doesn't help while he's trying to become a man. And now he's got this fucked up home life that just is not probably helping him learn the way of the world. So going forward, he graduated, surprise, surprise, he graduated from Sir Wilfrid Laurier Collegiate Institute, and then after that he was employed by the American company Amway, which I did some research on. That company. Seems like Amway was a pyramid scheme. Again, I don't live in Canada, but this is just what I found on good old Google when I researched these things. So but he did say that this experience of working for Amway really deeply influenced him because he liked being a salesperson that's kind of like in control. I think that kind of had to do with how he would take control of his victims and kind of take control of the situation, and why he also wasn't caught for so long, and also why the police never like red flagged this dude when he came in and did a interview with them. They never thought anything was like weird with him right off the bat, where they're like, we should probably watch this guy. They're like, he's normal, he's good, let him go, we'll wait to get the DNA results back, but in the meantime he's totally fine to go chill. So yeah, he probably is really good with talking in his words, people like that. So going forward though, while he was working at Amway, he was going to college, and soon he actually graduated in 1987, and he got a job as a juror accountant at Price Waterhouse. Great. Good job. It seems like all these rapists and murderers, they have like good jobs. I'm confused. I don't know. I guess you have to be a murderer, rapist to have a decent job and make 6 figures a year, but that's never enough for them. They have to fucking kill too. The 6 figures would be good for me, just so everyone knows. So he was dating throughout all of his life. I couldn't find too much about previous relationships except for one. Jennifer Thompson was the last girlfriend before Karla Homolka, which is one of our main girls in the story. But she had threatened to take him to police because he was starting to be very abusive towards her, both verbally and physically. And he would also try and force sex on her and just make her feel bad to have sex with him. And finally she said, I'm fucking done, and she left his ass, which good for her because she avoided a shit ton of BS with this motherfucker. And after she threatened him and left him, of May of that year, he raped 2 women and then another in July. So those were some of the ones I had told you about previous. May 1990, the police finally decided to show that sketch, and that's where they got those tips from. And a few of the girlfriends had saw the tips, and they're the ones that called in, and even a few friends had called the tips in to let police know that this looked like Paul Bernardo, and they think that's his guy, or they think that is police's guy. So at the time, though, the officers were overwhelmed by other tips and were unable to follow up with them. So it took quite a bit of time before they even went to follow up with Paul, which I think is kind of dangerous because, like, if you have tips and someone's calling, like, that could be dangerous for the person that's calling and, like, telling on that person. Like, if Paul were to find out, what if he went and killed one of these girlfriends? Or, what if... Also, victims are stupid sometimes. People are dumb. So, like, what if one of his girlfriends went and was like, his ex-girlfriend was like, hey, did you see that sketch of you? Like, it kind of looks like you, doesn't it? Like, now he sketched. Maybe he might kill her. Like, that's kind of dangerous, I feel. They should just go pick him up. Go get him. But they didn't. So, it took a while. And then finally, they went, got the samples from him, questioned him, but everything turned out great, and they had no concerns at all, so they decided, we'll just go ahead and send this off to the DNA lab, and let them just take their time doing that 2 years later, and we're just gonna sit over here and chill. Sounds good? Okay, cool. And that's basically what the fuck they did. And that's all I could find on Paul Bernardo's, like, previous history. So that's what we're working with. That's Paul Bernardo, growing up with 3 other siblings. There wasn't much to say about his other siblings. Didn't seem like he had a relationship with his parents as much as Karla Homolka did. His parents, from the news sources I watched, like, they weren't at the case. They weren't following along. They weren't being interviewed. So I don't know if they just said fuck him and, like, they just never came, or if they died maybe. I don't know. Couldn't find any of that information. So now going on to Karla Homolka. She was born in May 4th of 1970, and she is a Taurus. She's still alive. She's a Taurus. So we have a Virgo and a Taurus. Very interesting. So she was born in 1970 in Port Credit, which is in Ontario, Canada. And she was born to Carol Homolka and her mom, Dorothy, and they seem like they had a pretty decent life. I mean, like, her father was an alcoholic, and he was also a Czechoslovakian immigrant. Sorry, I'm having a hard time here. He was an immigrant, though, and but he was a salesman, so it kind of seemed like, her parents had jobs that were decent to support the family. They weren't, like, homeless, but her dad was a drunk and sometimes would just verbally abuse the mom, from what I understand, and then also sometimes projected that verbal abuse onto her and her 2 younger sisters, Lori and Tammy. So she did have those 2 younger sisters. Karla was the oldest, and then in age reference, it was Lori and then Tammy. So Tammy was the youngest daughter, and we'll talk more about her in a minute because she's also a star of this story. Not that she probably wants to be. And it seemed like Karla had a pretty bright childhood, or good childhood. She was a bright student. she was good in school, her father loved her, and it seemed like for the most part they had a pretty decent like upbringing, except for the father just having some rampage issues. But some of us have dealt with that. So but one of the weird things I did find on here that was maybe attributed to Carla letting Paul be a fucking weirdo is that her dad did cheat on her mom, but her mom's response to him cheating was to have a threesome. Yeah, a threesome. Fucking weird, right? Okay, just wanted weird. Weird. And she did that just to keep things normal, and from what I understand, shit was normal. He got his way. Cool. One of the things that was mentioned about Carla is that from a young age she was pretty stubborn and domineering, and she always wanting to speak her mind to adults, and always kind of had that head on her shoulders where she knew what was going on, and she was going to tell you she knew what was going on. And everyone knew that, so fun. And then a little bit later in life, when Carla was growing up in, I think it was like, it says secondary school because they're in Canada, so I think that's middle school. She was going to Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School, and during that time she did kind of dress a little provocatively, a little maybe gothy, you could say, just a little crazy and out there, different than her peers. And she would also cut herself, and then claim false suicide attempts, which is really awful. And unfortunately, I'm sure a few of us know people like that have said, I try to kill myself, or I'm going to kill myself, and it's just really not even funny. But she was one of those people, and so as a way of seeking attention, that's what she would do when she was in school. Later in life, though, around, it was like 15, Homoka got a part-time job at a pet store. While she was in high school, she later graduated in 1988, and then later got a job at a veterinary clinic as a full-time veterinary technician, which is great. Oh my god, I work in the veterinary field. What a wild story, this bitch. I can't. But that was Carla. So, and I did look up the clinic. It was like a little small clinic in Canada, just a little basic, tiny little clinic that she was a technician at. I did see in a documentary, someone that worked with her said that all the animals, were in great care. And I was like, why are we mentioning them? But okay, I'm glad the animals are being taken care of. So, apparently she was just fucked up to humans, not animals. Good to know, right? So while she was working, though, part-time at that pet store, that's when she met Paul. They met over at a hotel, and that first night they met, they decided, wouldn't this be a good time to just have sex, have a good time, even though she was like 6 years younger than him, and he was over age. He was over 21. And they said, yep, sure, let's do that. So had sex at this hotel one night, and they literally fell in love, is what was said. Perfect match for each other. That's why this case is referred to Ken and Barbie case, because they were always seen together, always seen doing stuff together, and just always being all over each other. When Paul was in school, he would drive 80 miles, like twice a week, back and forth, to go see Carla in Port Credit. And Carla's parents were fine with it. They thought the age difference was okay. They made him sleep on the couch, and it didn't really matter because while everyone was sleeping, he would just go and sneak into Carla's room anyway, and then sneak back out in the morning time so no one would catch him. So her parents just didn't seem to understand that. I don't know, when I was growing up, there was definitely smart and then dumb parents that you could tell, definitely some parents where they just didn't care, and it was how do you not even know what's going on? And then other parents are you leave this fucking door open and I'm gonna come check in on you guys every 30 minutes to an hour just to fucking make sure. And those were the smart parents, because I don't know why you would think 16, anywhere from 14 to 18 year olds aren't gonna be fucking around alone, a female and a male, or depending on whatever you're into, male and male, female and female. You gotta watch your fucking kids, okay? Gotta watch them kids. They are mischievous little shits. And her parents just didn't really seem to care. Had no problem with it. And they thought Paul was a great guy. which he was not. But in 1989, Carla graduated, and it didn't really mention if she wanted to go to college. I assume she just went straightforward that technician. Like it said, she was a certified technician in vet med, so she probably had to do some kind of class for that, but I couldn't figure out anything or when she did that, if it was like during when she was in high school type of thing. So somehow, between those time periods, she became a technician. Her and Paul, during this time, like right when she pretty much graduated, that's when Paul was like, hey, I'm gonna come move over in there, is that okay? And Carla's parents, like, totally didn't have a problem with this. They were like, yeah, we don't care, you guys are older, go ahead. And I think at the time, actually, Paul had proposed to Carla, so her parents were probably thinking as well that this wasn't a really big issue since they were going to be married, and it'd be fine. And they would just, at the time too, they had said they were going to be living there so they could save up and buy a place. So they're probably thinking, oh, this is great first step for them. They're going to live here and save up and buy a house, which they did do, but, not after they did something else that was really fucked up. And so what they did that was so fucked up that we'll get into is Tammy Homolka. So Tammy Homolka is who we'll be talking about. Like I mentioned earlier, it's Carla Homolka's youngest sister. So Tammy was born in, I'm going to butcher this, Mississauga, Canada, on January 1st, 1975. So she was a Capricorn. And she was born to the same parents. All of the Homolka children shared the same parents. And she enjoyed track and field as well as soccer, as some of her hobbies that she did when she was growing up. So not much other digging I could find on Tammy Homolka that really told me much about her other than just the fucked up shit that happened to her. So we'll dive into that now. Paul had this weird fantasy for virgins, and unfortunately for Paul, Carla, his girlfriend, sorry, I'm getting confused here. Fortunately for Paul, Carla was not a virgin, which, I mean, obviously he didn't care because he was, like, driving over 80 miles twice a week to go see her, but it wasn't enough for him in his fucked up mind. And that and the rapes he was doing wasn't enough. So he told Carla, he, like, fucked with her and was like, I need a virgin, and your sister's a virgin, and she's really fucking hot, which I'm assuming is what he said, which is disgusting, but, hey, I need to get in there. And Carla was like, yeah, for sure, let's fucking get you in there. I don't know what the conversation really was, but that's what happened. And Paul would flirt with Tammy all the time, and it wasn't really said how she reacted to this, but I'm assuming that they all kind of just, like, thought this was cool and cute and, like, let it happen. And I assume, and I would hope, that he probably didn't do this in front of their parents. He probably waited till it was just, like, all three of them or just the two of them to be making these moves on Carla's youngest sister, which is also fucking weird. What's wrong with the middle sister? She's already fucked someone. She was good enough. So, like, weird. So he's telling Carla, like, I gotta get it in with your little sister. And Carla, fucked up as she is, she went and would go into Tammy's room and, like, unlock her windows and find out, I don't really know what she would do. She would be finding out ways so Paul could get in there and watch Tammy sleep so he could masturbate to her sleeping. Fucking disgusting. I just can't. Like, can you imagine being the parents of Tammy and Carla and finding out that your oldest daughter, the one who's supposed to be the big sister protecting the little ones, making sure, like, no one fucks with them and, they're safe to a certain degree, that she's letting her boyfriend in there to, like, still be, he's, I don't know what to say, like, how to use the wording, but she's letting him in there to, like, harass and fucking, like, assault their youngest daughter, and they're totally just like, whatever, chilling, like, and they don't catch it at all. I just can't even, like, that's fucking crazy to me that, like, not once they seen him, like, how many times did he do it too? Like, how many times did he go in there? Because it seemed like he did it quite a lot in what I was reading. It seemed like he went in there quite often. It's just fucking weird. I'm surprised, like, the parents had no idea, never caught them, never caught on, never had any kind of fucking idea. I would have been like, yo, actually, since Paul's a lot older, we're actually, either you guys can find a place to live, or Carla, you can stay living here, but Paul's gotta go. Like, he can't live here anymore with our 2 younger daughters. Like, he's fucking weird. Like, he's gotta go. He is over 21. He's an accountant. Like, he needs to figure his shit out. Like, why has he not figured his shit out? And he didn't. So, like, the beginning of December, Carla and Paul thought, hey, wouldn't it be a great idea if we just sedated my little sister so you could rape her? And Carla wanted to do this so Paul could have a Christmas present of a virgin that he could have sex with. Fucked up. And Paul was like, that's a great idea. So I don't know why I keep saying Tammy. Carla decided to steal some halothane from her work as a vet tech, and also decided to steal some, like, pills from her work. So she used the pills first to mix into Tammy's drink that they had made her. She passed out, but it was only for like a minute or two. So by the time Paul had tried to start sexually assaulting Tammy, she had woken up. So that plan didn't work. I don't know if Tammy had any idea what was going on, like woke up and was like, what the fuck? Why are you like getting undressed? Like, what did she wake up to? Like, that's weird. So she woke up, didn't work. So then Carla was like, you know what? Let's use the halothane and the mixed pills, and let's do this at the next, like, shindig. So they waited to Christmas Eve when the family was having, like, a party, and, you know, they were allowed to have a few drinks. So they mixed Tammy a drink, and they went downstairs to the basement, and this was right around when the parents decided to go to bed. So there was no parents awake, and from what I understand, Lori, the middle sister, she was not there. So I don't know where she was, if she lived on her own during this time or what, but she wasn't there. So it was just Carla, Tammy, and Paul. And they made Tammy this drink, which was mixed with the sleeping pills. So, and I think they had made the concoction differently so she would pass out a little bit more. So Tammy drank this shit up, passed out. Then Carla was like, okay, so to avoid from what happened last time is I'm going to place this halothane soaked rag over her mouth so she, like, really won't wake up. And then about 10 minutes into Carla having, like, the rag over her sister's face, let that sink into, having the rag over her sister's face so she could help her sadistic ass motherfucking boyfriend rape her sister in their parents' house the night before Christmas. Yeah. So 10 minutes into that, Tammy starts vomiting because this is too many drugs in her system. The halothane just done fucked her up, and she starts vomiting in her sleep and gags on her vomit. And from what I read, it doesn't seem like Carla tried to help her, like, turn her on her side. Like, I don't know, I've never been with anyone that's, like, vomited in their sleep, but I would assume, like, if you were there, maybe you turn them on their side so they're not, like, choking on their fucking vomit and try and clear their airways. But it doesn't seem like Carla and Paul did any of that. From these fucked up things I know of them, they probably sat there and watched and were like, we weren't expecting that to happen. And probably just, like, were watching each other and watching her and just being fucking weird. So, unfortunately, that night, Tammy passed away. And before they even called the ambulance or called 911 to have someone come over there, or even wake the parents and alert them to what had happened, they took about an hour of where they had cleaned Tammy up, cleaned themselves up, made it look like, nothing had happened, and then they woke everyone up, and then they called called 911, and they was never found. Never found. Tammy her death was ruled as an accidental death of her just drinking too much alcohol that night and throwing up in her sleep and aspartating it. They had no idea that that halothane rag was placed on her, even though she had a chemical burn mark on her face. They literally just didn't connect the dots. Didn't think of anything, which is also stupid because, like, St. Catherine's and Scarborough were, like, 80 miles of each other, like 30 minutes. So, like, how did the cops not, like, say, like, oh, hey, this is involving Paul Bernardo again, like, he's a key witness, or, like, a key person to this, like, that was here, and he also just had all of his DNA and saliva and all of these things, like, taken from him to be tested. Like, how do they not make that connection and say, that's fucking weird, that's weird, we should probably question them? Nope, they didn't do that. They didn't make that connection, and so they just so Tammy's death was just ruled accidental, and they go on to live their life. 6 months later, because Carla and Paul were already engaged, 6 months later, they get married. And it was weird. I was like, why the fuck are they getting married after Tammy's, like, sister, after, I don't know why I keep saying that, after Carla's sister passed. And I guess Paul was quoted saying, like, when is enough time to grieve? Like, when will there be enough time? It's been 6 months. So he kind of just basically told everyone, shut the fuck up, we're getting married. Like, when would you prefer for us to get married? Like, in probably a bitchy-ass little way that he did. And, of course, no one's going to be like, oh, get married at this time. So everyone probably just went along with it, like, this sucks, but okay, like, here we are doing this. So they get married. At about this time, they have finally saved up enough money to go and buy a house and move out of Carla's parents. And they moved about 30 miles away. So it wasn't very far. And it seemed like they had a decent time when they first moved into their own house. So shortly after they moved into their house, I don't know like how long after, but they decided, I don't know if it was a they thing. They decided that, you know what, we're bored. We need to abduct someone else. So they decided they would take Leslie Mahaffey, because why not? So let me tell you a little bit about Leslie Mahaffey. Leslie was born on July 5th, 1976. So she was a Cancer. Her brother Ryan, he was born some years after, so she was older. And she had a pretty normal childhood. Her parents both had pretty decent jobs, and she was pretty close with her family. Because she had these little rebel periods, her parents were kind of putting their foot down on disciplining their child. And so right before Leslie was abducted, she was attending a memorial for a teen that she had knew that was killed in a car accident. And so right after she attended that memorial, her mom had, put her foot down about her being a little bit rebellish and said, hey, you're going to be home at this time, and if you're not home, I'm going to lock you out. And she came home later than her curfew and found that the door was locked. So she decided, I'm going to go travel to a phone booth, call a friend, see if I can stay the night there, and what have you. She called her friend. She got to the phone, called her friend. Her friend said, from what I understand, like, no, you can't stay the night here. So she was just going to go back to her house, and from what I understand, I think she was just going to go home and, like, sleep in the backyard or something till she could be let into the house, which really fucking sucks. On her way back, though, to her house, Bernardo was actually out looking into backyards, hoping to find a victim. And so when Bernardo caught sight of Leslie, he was probably like, fuck yeah, this is great. Someone just to come to me. And that's basically what happened, is he had lured Leslie into getting into the car, and finally she got into the car. From what I understand, it was, a little bit hard for her to get in the car, and a few people had actually noticed someone forcing her into the car because she didn't want to go. But he ended up getting her in the car, and the next morning was when one of Leslie's friends, the one that she had called to see if she could stay the night, she had called to see, if she got home okay, and then her mom said, what the fuck, no, she's not here. And then that's when the alarm bell started to sound for Leslie, and they started to call the police and put out that she was indeed missing. And she was just with Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka at their house. And what would happen to Leslie would be pretty fucking brutal as well. They weren't really, it's not like they were taking them and being nice to them, taking them on shopping sprees. They were fucked up to every single person. But now it wasn't just Paul, it was also Carla that was involved with this. So obviously she was involved with her sister's death, didn't do a fucking thing except move with Paul. She never said that it affected her. No one ever noticed that it, like, anything had happened. So, it was about 6 months later, then now there's Leslie, and Paul brings her back to the house, and here's Carla. And what they did is they raped, tortured, they strangled her twice with an electric cord, so she came back from the strangulation, basically, and then she fucking woke up, and he just strangled her again. Which I couldn't imagine, like, being strangled and then, like, fading out and then coming back and being like, and being, like, fucking scared again and then, like, dying again in a sense, like, being done. Like, that's just awful. And then after they strangled her and killed her, they dismembered her. So with Leslie, they did cut her up and put her body pieces into concrete, and then they dumped it into a lake, which was really awful. And I think it was like 2 weeks later, someone was like looking into the water, just trying to enjoy life, and saw something floating in the water and was like, what the fuck's that? And then they realized that's a body. Like, that's a piece of a hand or something. It was a piece of her body that they had seen. And then from there, they had called the cops and came down and realized, this is fucked up. We have a murder on our hands. So after that, it was kind of like a cooling down period, I guess you could say. Or maybe, Carla and Paul were just having fun abusing each other, because from what I understand, they both claim that each other were abusive to one another. However, Carla has a lot more proof of the abuse that Paul inflicted on her, such as family and friends and co-workers noticing that there was bruising on her, that she was being controlled, whereas Paul didn't really have too many witnesses come forth saying that Carla abused him. But I'm sure in a relationship like this, there is probably different types of abuse going back and forward to each other. So Kristen French is the next victim. We'll go into a little bit about her. She was born in 1976, and she was also a member of the precision ice skating team. So she seemed like a pretty good future ahead of her and some hobbies that she enjoyed doing, and seemed like a pretty good all-around child or teenager. So on April 16th, 1982, she was walking home from the Holy Cross Secondary Catholic School in St. Catharines, and she was approached at the entrance of the parking lot by Carla and Paul under the pretense of needing directions. And Carla had went into an interview and stated that Paul had her in the car and just said, okay, here's the plan. We're going to drive around. If we see anyone, you're going to ask them for directions and we're going to get them into the car. And then he, from what I understand, made Carla repeat that back to him, okay, what is it that we're doing? And Carla had to say, we're going to drive around. I'm going to ask someone for directions, blah, blah, blah. So they had pre-planned abducting someone. So this was premeditated. Okay, so they drove around, find Kristen, ask her for directions. While Kristen was talking to Carla, Paul got out of the car and came up behind her with a knife and forced her into the car. And this was also seen by several eyewitnesses. And I believe I think it was her, or was it Leslie? I can't freaking remember, but I'm pretty sure it was Kristen. One of her shoes fell out of the car as well. So they also found her shoe at the site and was okay, here's a fucking shoe. This girl, this 14-year-old, 15-year-old girl is missing. What are we gonna do? And then there started the search for Kristen French, which was also just really sad because it seems like Kristen was kind of, I don't want to say, I don't want to compare the two victims between Leslie and Kristen, but it seemed like, Leslie was kind of being a wild child, being a little party kid. It is really hard for parents to, whined in those children, and I'm sure her parents were just doing what they thought was best, like trying to teach her a lesson of like, hey, you can't treat this like a hotel, you have to come home at certain times. And unfortunately for Leslie, she didn't follow the directions, and that one time she didn't follow the directions would be pretty fatal for her. Whereas Kristen was going to school, doing extracurricular activities, and seemed to be an all-around good head on her shoulders and being like a good student. So it doesn't seem like, it just kind of sucks that Kristen was just out minding her business, like not in the middle of the night, not locked out of the house, and she was also abducted and in a church parking lot. That's what makes it so sad. Like, you would think if your kid was walking through a parking lot, like in a church area, like they'd be good. Like, it's a safe area probably. No, it's not. So Kristen was taken by them, drove back to their house, and it seems like even though it was seen by eyewitnesses, no one got like a license plate number. I know they did see what kind of car it was, but because there was different eyewitness accounts, like the car make and model was different than what they were actually driving. So the eyewitness accounts weren't even accurate, which I don't know if that would have helped Kristen at all, or because it kind of seems like the police were a little bit lazy in trying to track down who was responsible for these fucked up crimes. So I don't know if it would have made a difference, but I mean, the witnesses didn't even really see what car took her, so it, it didn't really matter in the end. So they held her in captivity for 3 days, and they kept her in the basement, and one of the things that Carla and Paul thrived on was taking videos. They took videos of Tammy, Leslie, and Kristen when they were fucking doing shit with them and being sick little shitheads, which I also don't understand. Why do serial killers videotape themselves? Serial killers, serial rapists, just people who hurt animals, like any of these people in the true crime or crime world that we talk about, I would say 85% of the time, maybe 75% of the time, they have pictures or videos of themselves doing it, and I'm just like, why the fuck? Anyway, they recorded, back to Kristen, I'm sorry. They videotaped themselves torturing her and subjecting her to sexual abuse and degrading her as well, by forcing her to drink large amounts of alcohol, which I'm sure was just like, this whole thing I couldn't imagine be so fucking awful. They ended up murdering her on April 19th, 1982, and I think Paul just dumped her body. Like, he didn't care this time to, like, go through and chop her up and put her into concrete and dump her, because they just dumped her body around along number 1 side road in North Burlington on April 30th, 1982. So they kept her body for a few days, which is also disgusting. I can't imagine post-mortem bodies and, like, people keeping them. It's just fucking nasty, like, ugh. And so it took a while for them, to find Kristen, and finally after they found her, they were like, fuck, we have a fucking serial killer on our hands. This is awesome. So they started looking, high and low to figure out who the fuck was doing this to the women in the community. And not even the women, the teenagers in the community. This was a 14, 14, and 15-year-old. These were young children still that weren't even they weren't even old enough to drive. Like, these were still little kids, middle school, like right out of going into high school, and they were just abused. It really fucking sucked. So right about after Kristen French was murdered, police had actually gotten back the DNA evidence from the Scarborough rapists that we talked about earlier, and once they got those back, it was a match for Paul's DNA, and they were onto something. So they started watching Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, and when they were watching the house, they noticed Carla leaving the house one day with 2 huge raccoon black eyes. And they stopped her, and they're like, hey, you want to talk to us about this? Like, come over here and let's have a conversation. So she didn't want to talk to them really at first. And then I think after she had Carla went home and talked to her parents. I believe her parents kind of were like, hey, like, you need to tell them what's happening, because they were under the impression, like, oh, it's just the abuse, like, just the abuse she was suffering from Paul. Really, it was so much more than that. But her parents were like, hey, like, you should talk to the police, like, we should, like, we're here for you, like, tell them what's going on so we can, you know, help you so you can divorce him and so he can, you know, get in trouble for this shit. Like, we're here for you. And so Carla went in and talked to the police and let them know what was going on and how she was being abused. And they didn't know if she knew about the Scarborough rapist, but so they were questioning her about it. And when this started, she started getting really fucking freaked out. She's like, oh, they must be on to me for the other rapes as well, for Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey. And they thought they knew about that. They thought, oh, they've caught me. So she started saying, oh, and, you know, like, I'll tell you more. I don't really know how the beginning of it went. I did watch a few of the audio files from her being questioned, but I couldn't tell, you know, like, how she really got into telling them it was Paul. But basically, through them both talking, they realized, like, Carla knew a lot more than what she was saying and what she was, like, leading on. Like, she was talking about something completely fucking different than what their questions about. They had no idea that Carla was involved in Kristen and Leslie's disappearance and death. They thought they were just talking about these rapes that had happened about 4 years prior that maybe she knew about, maybe she didn't, because they were married after they stopped taking place anyway. So it would be logical to assume that maybe she had no idea what was going on. So they quickly realized, like, Carla knew a lot of shit that they did not fucking know. So she lawyered up, smart girl. She fucking got a lawyer, and her lawyer went to the Crown, which is basically like the Constitution for Canada. They went to the Crown, and they wanted to work out a plea bargain. And because she knew too much, they couldn't get her, like, no prison time, but they did get her, like, a very short prison time for her to tell them, like, everything that happened. So she went in and, you know, decided to be honest and tell the Crown, or the investigators of the Crown, like, this is what happened with Leslie, this is what happened with Kristen. And at first, she didn't say anything about her sister. She left her sister's death out of it. And honestly, at the time, no one really had any questioning of the death of Tammy. They didn't think it was, like, related at all, until it was about a few months later, and we'll get into that in a minute. So put a note in that, because I don't want to go in there. But basically, they got Carla to admit about Leslie and Kristen. And at this time, Paul Bernardo was also placed under custody and taken into arrest for the Scarborough rapist, but also for Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. His disappearance and murder, because they obviously had his DNA evidence for the Scarborough rapist. So he was done. There was no way he was getting out, but they were still trying to figure out exactly how Carla was connected, and she was just word vomiting. Oh, Paul did this. He did this to me. She did mention that, like, when her and Paul were like, talking, he would threaten her, like, you're not gonna tell anyone about this. If you do, I'm gonna fucking kill you. I'm gonna kill your family. So she was playing the battered wife syndrome, where basically, if you don't know what battered wife syndrome is, it's basically you've just been abused so much to where you're not gonna speak out against this person. You'll do exactly what they say because you're a victim as well, and you know that if you go along, it'll be less abuse for you. So that's kind of what she did, and the police believed her, and they totally thought she was a great witness to use against Paul and to really put Paul into jail for forever and not let him out, which was the case until Paul Bernardo's attorney. So let me back up. That was until Paul Bernardo's attorney went to the house, but that wasn't before the prosecution went and got a search warrant for their house to find everything that would be in relation to these rapes and murders. So they went, got the stuff they needed, but they did miss a few key evidence. And if you remember, I told you that Paul and Carla recorded themselves doing these fucked up things. When they went through and got the search warrant and did the search, they never found the videotapes. So Paul's attorney knew this, and Paul told his attorney where he could find the tapes because he had hid them. So Paul's attorney was able to go back in the house after they did the search and was like cleared to go in and do his own search and find his own crap. So he goes in there and he finds the tapes. He doesn't let the police see them. He doesn't let the police know he has them, which I'm pretty sure that's illegal. And he takes them, hides them, doesn't bring them towards the prosecution, doesn't let the court know he has them. He just keeps them secret. And then if this case was publicly banned from being talked about until like the case was taking place. So I don't know why, but this attorney for Paul was actually removed from the case, and so when that happened, he had to give all the evidence he had to the new attorney. When he did that, he gave the tapes to the new attorney, and the new attorney was like, what the fuck is this? Like, this wasn't noted anywhere, like, this wasn't said that we have this. So he was a good attorney, he was a good lawyer, and he went and turned those tapes in. Once he turned them in, everyone realized that Carla had a huge part in these murders and rapes and what she was leading on to. It wasn't just her being forced to do things, she was taking part in it as well. She was helping rape these girls, she was helping put objects into these girls, she was recording, she was taking turns, okay? Fucked up. So she had already made her plea deal though, so they literally didn't want to go back and say, oh, you know, Carla lied, so now we're going to take away her plea deal. They wanted everyone to trust the process and like trust the government. So because they made this deal, they didn't want the public to think like less of them, like, oh, you know, we can't be honest to them because look what they did to Carla. So they held up Carla's deal, even though I'm pretty sure it was like 90% of the Canadian population like was really infuriated with this case and really thought that Carla should have gotten a different sentence to where she got more time in prison. Because let me tell you folks, she only got 12 years in prison. And that was 5 years for Kristen's death, 5 years for Leslie's death, and 2 years for her sister's death. 2 years. 2 years. 2 years. That's like 400 days in prison for a death. That is not a fucking lot. That's a death of your sister in your own home with drugs you stole from your job. Like, what the fuck? 2 years? Are you kidding me? Well, if you guys want to kill anyone, go to Canada. You might get lucky. That's basically, yeah. So Carla got out after 12 years. Paul, he went to his case. He was sentenced to life in prison. And he'll never get out for everything he did. He also went and admitted to more rapes once, I think it was in 2007, after he had been locked up for quite a while, just to get off of, like, a death row sentence, and to kind of keep things in his favor a little bit. So, after that, he had just admitted to about, I think it was like 5 more rapes, and then the other rapes that we had talked about earlier just confirmed that he indeed did those, and did abduct them and rape them, and then luckily for those women, he let them go. And that was one of the things that he argued about in his case, was that before he had met Carla, he was just a serial rapist. He would let these victims go after he raped them. But after he met Carla was the one that insinuated to kill them. She was the one that wanted to take it a step further. He wanted to let the girls go, but she wouldn't. And that was something that was part of his argument. But again, this case had a public ban on it. So none of the news reporters, none of the magazine reporters, no one could cover this case until after it was done, because they wanted to give Paul Bernardo a fair case, to fair jury members. So like all of Carla going to court for her 12-year sentence to get, charged with that and everything, no one knew about that. No one had any idea what was going on until after Paul Bernardo had his day in court, and then they were able to report on it. The only downside of that was the publication ban was only for Ontario, so all of the US was covering the case, and they couldn't do a thing about it, which I think is just so stupid. Why waste your time and ban the whole public from seeing the case when America can record it and release it as well? And if your citizens just work a little bit harder, they'll be able to see what the fuck's going on. I don't understand, but whatever. They gave him a fair trial, and if you're concerned with that, at least you can say Paul Bernardo got a fair trial on the fucking 20 women he raped and the 5 people he killed. Yeah, it's cool. He got a fair trial. So yeah, that's pretty much the case, though, of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. Paul is serving his life in prison. Karla is already out of prison, and she has remarried. She actually remarried her attorney's brother, and now has 2 kids that are in school, that she's mothering, and having a grand fucking time. And another fun fact for you is that Karla's parents, actually, from what I've read, still live in the same house that Tammy was murdered in, which I thought was pretty fucked up. And I couldn't find whether or not they still support Karla or if they're still, like, in contact with her. I mean, it's kind of weird that they live in the same house that their other daughter was murdered in. But I do know that Karla's other younger sister, Lori, is still close with Karla. They still talk. They're still around each other, so, I mean, I guess that sister just didn't care as long as she wasn't the one that died. She's like, I'll be close with you, it's cool. So I'm sure there's things I forgot, so don't come at me and kill me if there was maybe something I left out in this case that you remember. And then if there was, then maybe you should come and help me do my podcast. But if you've listened this far, this was quite long, so thanks for hanging in there and listening to my podcast. I'm going to be hoping to post a podcast like once every month to give myself enough time to research and record everything properly. I don't want to be rushing, so like it's, not as good as it could be. I want to make sure everything is as good as it possibly can be for the podcast. So hopefully you guys will tune in with me next month. So I would say maybe July 1st I'll post my next episode, and I hope you guys all enjoyed this episode of the Ken and Barbie Killers and my first podcast. Thanks so much for making it this far to the very end. Congratulations for you. I can't believe you listened to me talk for this long, but I really hope you enjoyed it. And then, like I said earlier, if you would ever be so kind to like this video, share it with your friends and family, share it on your social media. The best thing you can do to help your friends that are doing these kinds of YouTube videos or podcasts is to share the shit out of it. That's the biggest way you're going to get our names out there. So I'd really appreciate it if you enjoyed this to like it and share it with someone who would enjoy it as well. And then follow my Instagram page, which is at Devil in the Details Pod, 2 Ds. I really need more followers, and you can also find some more pictures from the case. I'll be posting pictures of the victims, as well as a few pictures of Tammy, Karla, and Paul, just so you can put a face to the story. And then also be posting a few pictures and video clips of the case from the news outlets as well. So like I said, hope you enjoyed this story, and I hope to see you guys again next month. Thanks so much for following along.